It fell heavy and cold over the city, blurring the edges of glass towers and turning the streets into rivers of reflected light. Inside the executive suite on the 47th floor of Hanshin Corporation, the world seemed distant and unreal, a painting framed by floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked everything and touched nothing. Kang Minho stood at those windows now, one hand pressed flat against the glass, feeling the faint vibration of the storm outside. His reflection stared back at him with the same expression he wore every day, controlled, measured, empty of anything that might be mistaken for vulnerability. At 34, he had built an empire from the ruins of his father's failing textile company, transforming it into one of the largest real estate conglomerates in Seoul. His name appeared in business journals. His face graced the covers of financial magazines. People bowed when he entered rooms. But none of them knew that when he returned to his penthouse each night, he felt nothing. Behind him, his assistant knocked softly before entering. "The car is ready, sir. You have the charity gala at 7, and the investors' dinner immediately following." Minho did not turn. "Cancel the gala." There was a pause. "Sir, you're the keynote speaker. The event has been planned for—" "I said cancel it." His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. The assistant bowed and left without another word. Minho remained at the window a moment longer, then turned and walked to his desk. On the corner sat a single photograph in a silver frame, a small boy with wide dark eyes and a hesitant smile. Kang Jiwoo, 5 years old. The only thing in Minho's carefully constructed life that he had not planned for, had not wanted, and yet could not imagine existing without. Jiwoo had come into his life 3 years ago, the result of a brief relationship with a woman Minho had never truly loved. She had died in a car accident when Jiwoo was 2, leaving the child in Minho's custody with no warning and no preparation. In the beginning, Minho had hired nannies and tutors and tried to continue his life as though nothing had changed. But Jiwoo had been so small, so quiet, looking up at him with those enormous eyes that seemed to ask questions Minho did not know how to answer. Slowly, against every instinct he possessed, Minho had learned to be a father. He was not warm. He did not know how to play or laugh easily, but he made sure Jiwoo was safe, educated, and cared for. He rearranged his schedule to have breakfast with his son every morning. He read to him at night, even though Jiwoo often fell asleep before the story ended. It was not love in the way other people described it. It was duty, responsibility, the protection of something fragile that depended entirely on him. And yet, when Jiwoo smiled at him, Minho felt something shift inside his chest that he could not name. He picked up his phone and dialed the head of security. "I'm leaving early today. Prepare the car. I'm picking up Jiwoo from school myself." It was a rare thing, and he could hear the surprise in the man's voice. "Of course, sir. Right away." Minho ended the call and gathered his coat. Outside, the rain continued to fall. The private academy where Jiwoo attended kindergarten was located in one of the wealthiest districts in Seoul, surrounded by manicured gardens and tall iron gates. Minho's car pulled up to the entrance just as parents began arriving to collect their children. He stepped out into the rain, an umbrella held by his driver, and walked toward the entrance with his usual measured stride. Inside, children were gathered in the main hall, their laughter echoing off the marble floors. Minho spotted Jiwoo immediately, standing alone near the window, clutching a drawing in both hands. The boy's expression was serious, almost sad, and Minho felt that strange tightness in his chest again. "Jiwoo," he called softly. The boy turned, and his face lit up with such pure joy that Minho had to look away for a moment. Jiwoo ran to him, holding up the drawing. "Appa, I made this for you!" It was a crayon drawing of 2 figures, one tall, one small, standing beneath a rainbow. Minho took it carefully, studying the crooked lines and bright colors. "It's very good," he said quietly. "I'll put it in my office." Jiwoo beamed. They left the academy together, Minho holding his son's hand as they walked toward the waiting car. The rain had lightened to a drizzle, and the streets were crowded with evening traffic. Minho's security team flanked them at a discreet distance, and everything felt routine, predictable, safe. Until it wasn't. They were halfway across the plaza when the noise began. A sudden roar of voices, the crash of metal, the screaming. Minho turned sharply and saw the crowd surging toward them, a chaotic mass of people running from something he couldn't see. His security team moved immediately, forming a barrier, but the crowd was too large, too panicked. Someone shoved past Minho, hard enough to break his grip on Jiwoo's hand. "Jiwoo!" Minho shouted, but his voice was lost in the chaos. He saw his son stumble, fall, disappear beneath the churning movement of bodies. Minho pushed forward, shouting, trying to reach him, but the crowd was a living wall that crushed inward with terrifying force. His security team was trying to fight through, but they were too slow, too far away. Minho's heart stopped. And then he saw her. A figure in ragged clothing, thin and small, darting through the crowd with impossible speed. She moved like water, slipping between bodies, and then she was crouching over Jiwoo, shielding him with her own body as the crowd surged around them. Minho watched as she curled herself over his son, taking the blows and the crushing weight, never moving, never letting go. By the time Minho reached them, his security team had finally managed to push the crowd back. He dropped to his knees beside the woman, pulling Jiwoo into his arms. The boy was crying but unharmed, and Minho held him so tightly he could feel the small heartbeat against his chest. "Appa," Jiwoo sobbed. "I was scared." I know. You're safe now." Minho looked down at the woman who had saved his son. She was still on her hands and knees, breathing hard, her hair falling in dirty tangles around her face. Her clothes were torn and stained, and there was a bruise forming on her cheek. But when she looked up at him, her eyes were clear and steady, and Minho felt something inside him crack open. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. She shook her head slowly, then pushed herself to her feet. "The boy? Is he okay?" "Because of you." Minho stood as well, still holding Jiwoo. "Wait, please, let me..." But she was already backing away, her gaze darting toward the dispersing crowd. "I have to go." "Wait!" Minho reached out, but she turned and slipped into the flow of people, disappearing as quickly as she had appeared. Minho stood frozen, Jiwoo clinging to his neck, staring at the place where she had been. His security chief approached, speaking urgently about protocols and failures, but Minho barely heard him. All he could see were those eyes, tired, wary, but filled with a kindness he had not expected, a kindness that had saved his son's life. That night, after Jiwoo had finally fallen asleep, Minho sat in his study with a glass of whiskey he did not drink. The rain had started again, drumming against the windows, and the city beyond was a sea of blurred light. He could not stop thinking about her. The way she had moved without hesitation, throwing herself into danger for a child she did not know. The way she had looked at Jiwoo with such gentle concern, even as she was clearly in pain herself. The way she had refused his help and vanished back into the streets as though she were made of smoke. Minho had lived his entire life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Money, influence, access. He had learned to read the calculations behind every smile, the agenda hidden in every kindness. But that woman had asked for nothing. She had not even waited to be thanked. He picked up his phone and called the head of security. "The woman who helped my son today. I want her found." There was a brief silence. "Sir, we have no identification. No surveillance footage captured her face clearly. She could be anyone." "Then search everywhere. Homeless shelters, soup kitchens, street corners. I don't care how long it takes. Find her." "Yes, sir." Minho ended the call and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He did not understand why this mattered so much. It was gratitude, surely. A debt that needed to be repaid, that was all. But as he closed his eyes, he saw her face again. Thin and pale, marked by hardship, but holding a dignity that no amount of wealth could buy. And he knew, with a certainty that unsettled him, that he would not rest until he found her. The search began the next morning. Minho assigned an entire team to the task, pulling resources from his security division and hiring private investigators with experience in locating missing persons. They combed through footage from nearby cameras, interviewed witnesses, and compiled descriptions. But the woman had left no trace. She had appeared like a ghost and vanished just as completely. Days passed, then weeks. Minho continued his work, attending meetings and overseeing projects, But his mind was always elsewhere. At night, he would stand at the window of his study, looking out over the city, wondering where she was. If she was safe, if she was hungry, if she regretted saving his son. Jiwoo asked about her sometimes. "Where is the kind lady, Appa?" Minho did not have an answer. He began going out himself, driving through the districts where the homeless gathered. He would park his car and walk through the streets, ignoring the stares and whispers, searching faces in the dim light. His security team followed at a distance, uneasy but silent. He saw so much suffering in those walks. People huddled in doorways, their eyes hollow and defeated. Families living in tents beneath overpasses. Children too young to understand why they had no home. It was a world that existed alongside his own, invisible to those who did not wish to see it, and Minho felt a shame he had never experienced before. How had he lived 34 years without noticing this? How had he built an empire on the same ground where people starved? One evening, nearly a month after the incident, Minho found himself standing outside a soup kitchen in one of the poorest neighborhoods in Seoul. The building was old and crumbling, but warm light spilled from the windows, and he could hear voices inside. Laughter, conversation, the clatter of dishes. He hesitated at the door, suddenly uncertain. What was he even doing here? What did he think he would find? But he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at him, dozens of faces, lined with exhaustion and hardship, staring at the man in the expensive coat who clearly did not belong. Minho stood frozen, feeling the weight of their gazes, the judgment and suspicion and confusion. Then an older woman approached, wiping her hands on an apron. Her face was kind but wary. "Can I help you?" Minho cleared his throat. "I'm looking for someone. A woman. She would have been here about a month ago. He stopped, realizing how absurd this sounded. "She saved my son." The woman studied him for a long moment, then gestured toward a corner of the room. "We get a lot of people through here, but if you want to describe her, you can try." Minho did, giving every detail he could remember. Thin, pale, dark hair, eyes that held a quiet strength despite everything. A scar on her left hand. The woman listened, then shook her head slowly. "I'm sorry. That could be a lot of people." Minho nodded, disappointment settling heavy in his chest. "Thank you." He turned to leave, but the woman called after him. "Wait." He stopped. She walked closer, lowering her voice. "There is someone who might fit that description. She used to come here regularly, but we haven't seen her in weeks. Her name was Lee Sora." Lee Sora. Minho repeated the name silently, committing it to memory. "Do you know where she went?" "No. People like her. They move around. They don't stay in one place for long." The woman paused. "But if you find her, tell her we miss her. She was always kind, always helping others, even when she had nothing herself." Minho felt something tighten in his throat. "I will." He left the soup kitchen and walked back to his car, the name echoing in his mind. Lee Sora. Finally, he had something to search for. Not just a face in the crowd, but a name, a person, someone real. And he would not stop until he found her. It took another 2 weeks. The investigators finally located a shelter on the outskirts of the city, where a woman matching Sora's description had stayed briefly before moving on. The shelter director remembered her. Quiet, polite, never asked for more than she needed. She had left one morning without explanation and had not returned. But she had mentioned once that she sometimes slept in the parks near the Han River when the weather was warm enough. Minho went there himself. It was late afternoon, the sky heavy with clouds, and the park was nearly empty. He walked along the river's edge, his footsteps slow and deliberate, scanning every bench and sheltered alcove. His security team waited at the parking lot, giving him space, though he knew they were watching. He found her sitting beneath a tree, her back against the trunk, staring out at the water. She looked thinner than he remembered, her clothes even more worn, but her face was calm. She did not notice him at first, lost in whatever thoughts occupied her mind, and Minho stood a few meters away, suddenly unsure of what to say. Then she turned her head, and their eyes met. Recognition flickered across her face, followed immediately by something that looked like fear. She started to rise, to leave, but Minho stepped forward quickly. "Please," he said quietly. "Don't run." She froze, her body tense, ready to flee. "What do you want?" "To thank you." Minho kept his voice gentle, non-threatening. "You saved my son's life. I've been searching for you for weeks." Sora looked away, her jaw tight. "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know." Minho took another step closer. "But I need to repay you. Please, let me help you." "I don't need help. You're living on the streets." Her eyes flashed with something sharp and defensive. "And? That doesn't mean I need your charity." Minho stopped, stung by the coldness in her voice. He had expected gratitude, perhaps even relief. He had not expected this quiet, stubborn pride. "It's not charity," he said carefully. "It's a debt. You risked your life for my son. The least I can do is make sure you have a safe place to sleep and enough to eat." Sora laughed bitterly. "You think money solves everything, don't you? I think it solves hunger and cold." She turned to face him fully, and Minho saw the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. But beneath that exhaustion was a strength that took his breath away. "I don't want your money," she said quietly. "I don't want anything from you. I did what anyone would do. Now please, just leave me alone." She started to walk away, and Minho felt something close to panic rise in his chest. "Wait." Sora stopped but did not turn around. Minho struggled to find the right words. "At least, let me buy you a meal. Just one. Please." There was a long silence. Then, slowly, Sora turned back to him. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes. Curiosity maybe, or wariness, or simply the bone-deep weariness of someone too tired to keep fighting. "One meal," she said finally. "And then you leave me alone." Minho nodded, relief flooding through him. "One meal." He gestured toward the park entrance where a small restaurant sat overlooking the river. Sora hesitated, then began walking in that direction, and Minho followed a few steps behind, his heart beating harder than it had in years. He did not know why this felt so important. He only knew that he could not let her disappear again. The restaurant was quiet, nearly empty in the late afternoon lull. Minho chose a table by the window, and Sora sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the river outside. She looked so small in the chair, so fragile, and yet there was nothing weak about her. Minho ordered food, more than two people could eat, knowing she was likely hungry even if she would not admit it. When the dishes arrived, Sora stared at them for a long moment before picking up her chopsticks with careful, deliberate movements. She ate slowly, methodically, as though each bite required concentration. Minho watched her without speaking, noting the way her hands trembled slightly, the hollows beneath her cheekbones, the way she glanced toward the door every few minutes as if expecting someone to tell her she did not belong. "When did you last eat?" he asked quietly. Sora did not look up. "Yesterday." "Before that?" She was silent. Minho felt anger rise in his chest, not at her, but at the world that had brought her to this. "How long have you been on the streets?" 3 years. The answer was so matter-of-fact, so devoid of self-pity that Minho did not know how to respond. 3 years. He tried to imagine what that meant. 3 years of hunger, cold, fear, exhaustion. 3 years of being invisible. "What happened?" he asked. Sora set down her chopsticks and finally looked at him. Her eyes were dark and steady, holding a pain so deep that Minho felt it like a physical blow. "Does it matter?" "Yes." She studied him for a long moment, as if deciding whether he deserved the truth. Then she leaned back in her chair and spoke in a voice that was flat and emotionless, as though she were recounting someone else's life. "I used to be a teacher, elementary school. I loved it. I had a small apartment, a decent salary, a future." She paused, her gaze distant. "Then my mother got sick. Cancer. The treatment was expensive and I used everything I had. my savings, my credit. When she died, I had nothing left. I couldn't pay rent, lost my apartment, lost my job because I had no address. After that, she shrugged. It's hard to climb back up once you fall that far. Minho felt something break inside him. I'm sorry. Don't be. It wasn't your fault. But I could have what? Sora's voice was sharp now, cutting. Noticed me, helped me. You didn't even know I existed. No one did. That's how it works. People like me, we become invisible. Minho had no answer. She was right. He had walked past people like her 1,000 times, never seeing them, never caring. Why did you save my son? He asked quietly. Sora's expression softened just slightly. Because he was a child. Because he was scared. Because no one else was helping him. She looked down at her hands. Because maybe if someone had helped me when I needed it, things would be different. The silence that followed was heavy and painful. Minho wanted to say something, anything, but every word felt inadequate. Finally, Sora stood. Thank you for the meal, but I need to go. Wait. Minho rose as well. At least let me give you money, enough for a hotel room, a few nights of safety. I told you I don't want your money. Then what do you want? Sora looked at him, and for the first time, Minho saw something other than guarded distance in her eyes. He saw loneliness, longing, a desperate, aching need to be seen as more than a charity case. I want to not be pitied, she said quietly. I want to not feel like I'm drowning. I want to wake up one morning and not wonder if I'll survive the day. Her voice cracked, just barely. But I don't expect you to understand that. She turned and walked toward the door, and this time Minho did not try to stop her. He stood alone in the restaurant, watching her disappear into the gray afternoon, and felt a grief he could not explain. Minho did not sleep that night. He sat in his study, staring at nothing, replaying their conversation over and over. Her words echoed in his mind, each one a small cut that bled slowly. People like me, we become invisible. He thought about his life, the penthouses and boardrooms, the expensive cars and tailored suits, the carefully curated existence where everything was controlled and nothing was left to chance. He thought about all the times he had dismissed someone as unimportant, all the moments he had looked past suffering because it was easier than acknowledging it. He thought about Sora, sleeping somewhere in the cold tonight, alone and hungry, too proud to accept help. And he realized, with a clarity that felt like waking from a long dream, that he could not let this end here. Not because he owed her a debt, but because something about her, her quiet strength, her refusal to surrender, the way she had looked at Jiwoo with such gentle care, had reached inside him and touched something he thought had died years ago. He did not know what to call it yet, but he knew he needed to see her again. Over the following weeks, Minho began visiting the places where Sora might be. He went to the soup kitchen, the shelters, the parks along the river. Sometimes he saw her from a distance, sitting alone or helping distribute food to others. He never approached directly, afraid of driving her away, but he watched and learned. He saw the way she moved through the world, careful, vigilant, always alert to danger. He saw the way she helped others even when she had nothing to give, sharing food, offering kind words, sitting with the elderly and sick. He saw the way people on the streets looked at her with respect and affection, as though she were a light in the darkness they all inhabited. And slowly, Minho began to understand. Sora was not just surviving. She was living with a grace and compassion that most people with far more resources could never achieve. She had been stripped of everything, home, security, dignity, and yet she had not become bitter or cruel. She had become kinder. It humbled him. One evening, he found her at the soup kitchen, washing dishes in the back. He stood in the doorway, watching her work, and when she finally noticed him, she did not seem surprised. "You're persistent," she said, not unkindly. "I need to be." Sora dried her hands and turned to face him. "What do you want from me?" Minho took a breath. "I want to offer you a job." She blinked, clearly caught off guard. "A job?" "Yes. I need someone to help care for my son, a companion, someone who can be there when I'm working. He kept his voice steady, professional. You would live in my home, separate quarters, full salary, benefits. Sora stared at him as though he had spoken in a foreign language. You want me to work for you? Yes. Why? Because my son asks about you constantly. Because you saved his life and he trusts you. Because I trust you. Sora shook her head slowly. You don't even know me. I know enough. She turned away, her shoulders tense. This is insane. I'm homeless. I have no references, no credentials, nothing. Why would you possibly... Because you're kind. Minho interrupted quietly. Because you risked everything for a child you didn't know. Because in all the searching I've done, everyone I've spoken to says the same thing about you. That you're selfless, compassionate, and strong. He paused. Those are not things that can be taught. Sora was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. What if I fail? Then you fail. But I don't think you will. She turned back to him, and Minho saw tears standing in her eyes, though she did not let them fall. Why are you doing this? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Minho could have said it was gratitude. He could have said it was duty. He could have hidden behind a dozen rational explanations. But standing there, looking into her eyes, he realized the truth was simpler and far more complicated. Because I can't stop thinking about you, he said quietly. Because when I close my eyes, I see you protecting my son, and I feel something I haven't felt in years. Because you make me want to be better than I am. The silence that followed was absolute. Sora stared at him, her expression unreadable, and Minho felt his heart hammering in his chest. He had just confessed something he had barely admitted to himself, and now it hung between them like a fragile, terrifying thing. Finally, Sora spoke, her voice shaking. I'll think about it. It was not a yes, but it was not a no. And for now, that was enough. 3 days later, Sora appeared at the gates of Minho's estate. She stood there in the rain, holding a small bag that contained everything she owned, looking up at the towering house with an expression caught between hope and fear. The security guard called Minho immediately, and he came down to meet her himself, not bothering with an umbrella, letting the rain soak through his shirt. You came, he said, and he could not keep the relief out of his voice. Sora nodded slowly. I'll try. For 1 month. If it doesn't work, I leave. No questions. Agreed. He led her inside, through the marble entryway and up the sweeping staircase to the guest wing. He showed her to a room that was larger than any apartment she had ever lived in, with its own bathroom and a view of the gardens. Sora stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, taking it all in with wide eyes. This is too much, she whispered. It's what you deserve. She looked at him, and Minho saw the tears she had been holding back finally spill over. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking, and Minho stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Then, slowly, carefully, he stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. You're safe now, he said quietly. I promise. Sora nodded, unable to speak, and Minho left her alone to let her grieve and heal in whatever way she needed. The first week was difficult. Sora moved through the house like a ghost, barely speaking, eating little, spending most of her time in her room. Minho gave her space, letting her adjust at her own pace, but he watched from a distance, worried. It was Jiwoo who finally broke through. The boy had been ecstatic when he learned the kind lady was staying with them. He knocked on Sora's door every day, asking her to read with him, to play, to simply sit together. At first, Sora resisted, uncomfortable with the attention, but Jiwoo's innocent persistence was impossible to refuse. One afternoon, Minho came home to find them in the garden, Jiwoo laughing as Sora helped him build a tower out of wooden blocks. The sound of his son's joy stopped Minho in his tracks, and he stood watching them through the window, feeling something warm and painful expand in his chest. Sora looked up and saw him. For a moment, their eyes met, and Minho saw something in her expression that he had not seen before, a tentative, fragile happiness. She smiled. It was small and uncertain, but it was real, and Minho smiled back. As the weeks passed, Sora began to settle into her new life. She took her role seriously, caring for Jiwoo with a tenderness that made Minho's throat tight. She helped him with his homework, read him stories, listened patiently to his endless questions. She taught him small acts of kindness, how to share, how to notice when someone was sad, how to be gentle. Jiwoo adored her. And Minho found himself falling. He did not mean to. He had not planned for it. But every day he discovered something new about Sora that made her impossible to ignore. The way she hummed softly while cooking, the way she left little notes for Jiwoo to find, the way she spoke to the household staff with respect and gratitude, treating them as equals, the way she looked at him sometimes, when she thought he was not paying attention, with an expression so filled with longing and confusion that it mirrored his own. He began finding excuses to be near her, working from home more often, joining her and Jiwoo for meals, asking her opinion on small decisions. And slowly, carefully, they began to talk, not about the past, but about small things. Books, music, the way the light fell through the windows in the morning. It was in those quiet moments that Minho realized he was not just grateful to her. He was in love with her. The realization terrified him. He had spent years building walls around his heart, protecting himself from vulnerability, from the mess and chaos of human emotion. But Sora had walked through those walls as though they were made of paper, and now he was exposed, raw, feeling everything he had spent a lifetime avoiding. And he had no idea what to do about it. The turning point came on a cold December evening. Minho returned home late from a business dinner to find the house dark and silent. He assumed everyone was asleep, but as he passed the living room, he saw a faint glow of firelight and heard the soft sound of crying. He stopped. Sora was sitting on the floor in front of the fireplace, her knees drawn to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She did not notice him at first, lost in whatever pain consumed her, and Minho stood frozen in the doorway, his heart breaking. "Sora," he said gently. She looked up, startled, and quickly wiped her face. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize." Minho crossed the room and sat down beside her, close but not touching. "What's wrong?" Sora shook her head, unable to speak. Minho waited, giving her time, and finally she whispered, "Today is my mother's birthday. She would have been 60. The grief in her voice was so raw that Minho felt it like a physical wound. "Tell me about her," he said quietly. And Sora did. She spoke about her mother's laugh, her strength, the way she had sacrificed everything to give Sora a better life. She spoke about the long nights in the hospital, holding her mother's hand as she grew weaker. She spoke about the guilt she still carried, the feeling that she had failed, that she should have done more, saved more, been more. Minho listened without interrupting, and when she finally fell silent, he reached out and took her hand. "You didn't fail," he said firmly. "You loved her. You cared for her. That's all anyone can do." Sora looked at him, her eyes red and swollen, and whispered, "How do you move on from losing someone?" Minho thought about his own losses, his father, Jiwoo's mother, the pieces of himself he had buried along the way. "I don't know if you do," he said honestly. "I think you just learn to carry it. And maybe, if you're lucky, you find people who help you carry it." Sora's breath hitched, and then she was crying again, but this time she leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. Minho wrapped his arms around her, holding her as she wept, and felt something inside him shift irrevocably. He loved her, not because she was perfect, not because she had saved his son, but because she was human and flawed and brave and broken and beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with the soul. And in that moment, Minho made a decision. He would tell her. He would risk everything, his pride, his control, his carefully constructed life, and tell her how he felt. But not tonight. Tonight, he would just hold her and let her know she was not alone. The next morning, Minho woke early and found Sora in the kitchen making breakfast for Jiwoo. She looked tired but calm, and when she saw him, she gave him a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for last night." "Anytime." They worked in comfortable silence, and Minho felt the weight of unspoken words pressing against his chest. He wanted to tell her. He needed to tell her. But before he could speak, his phone rang. It was his assistant, her voice tight with urgency. "Sir, there's been an incident. The investors are threatening to pull out of the Gangnam project. You need to come in immediately." Minho closed his eyes, frustration flooding through him. "I'll be there in an hour." He ended the call and looked at Sora, who was watching him with understanding in her eyes. "You have to go," she said. "I don't want to." "But you have to." Minho hesitated, then nodded. "Tonight, when I come home. Can we talk?" Sora's expression flickered with something that might have been hope. "Yes." He left for the office, his mind already racing ahead to the conversation they would have. He would tell her everything. He would lay his heart bare and hope she felt even a fraction of what he felt. But when he returned home that night, exhausted and drained, Sora was gone. Her room was empty, her belongings were missing, and on the bed was a single note, written in her careful handwriting. "I'm sorry. I can't do this. Thank you for everything. Please take care of Jiwoo." Minho stood in the empty room, the note trembling in his hand, and felt the world collapse around him. She was gone, and he had no idea how to find her again. The days that followed were a blur of anguish and desperation. Minho searched everywhere. He called his investigators, his security team, everyone who had helped him find her the first time. But Sora had vanished as completely as she had before, leaving no trace, no clue, no way to follow. Jiwoo cried for her every night, asking when she would come back, and Minho had no answer to give. He held his son and whispered reassurances he did not believe, and inside he felt himself breaking apart. He did not understand. Why had she left? Had he done something wrong? Said something? Or had she simply realized that she did not belong in his world, that the gap between them was too wide to cross? Minho replayed every conversation, every moment, searching for the mistake he had made. But all he could see was the way she had looked at him sometimes, with longing, with fear, with a desperate hope that she seemed unable to trust. She had been afraid. Afraid of what? Of him? Of caring? Of being hurt again? Minho did not know, but he knew he could not give up. He continued searching, even as weeks turned into months. He visited the places where she might be, asked the people who had known her, left messages in every shelter and soup kitchen in Seoul. And he waited. Winter turned to spring, and still there was no sign of Sora. Minho threw himself into his work, trying to distract himself from the hollow ache in his chest. But nothing helped. The world felt colorless and flat without her, and he moved through his days like a ghost, numb and disconnected. Jiwoo grew quieter, more withdrawn. The joy that had filled the house during Sora's time with them had disappeared, replaced by a heavy silence that Minho could not break. One evening, as he was putting Jiwoo to bed, the boy looked up at him with tears in his eyes. "Did she leave because of me?" he whispered. Minho's heart shattered. "No, never. She loved you very much." "Then why did she go?" Minho had no answer. He pulled his son into his arms and held him tightly, wishing he could protect him from this pain, wishing he could turn back time and do things differently. "I don't know," he whispered, "but I promise you, I will find her, and I will bring her home." It was a promise he had no idea how to keep, but it was all he had. The break came in late May, almost 6 months after Sora had disappeared. One of Minho's investigators called with news. A woman matching Sora's description had been seen volunteering at a rural community center 3 hours outside of Seoul. The sighting was unconfirmed, but it was the first real lead they had had in months. Minho did not hesitate. He drove through the night, arriving at the small mountain village just as dawn was breaking. The community center was a simple wooden building surrounded by fields, and Minho felt his heart pounding as he approached. He found her in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, planting vegetables. She looked different, healthier. Her hair was longer, tied back in a braid, and there was color in her cheeks. She looked peaceful, and Minho felt a surge of emotion so powerful that he could not move, could not breathe, could only stand and stare at her as though she were a dream that might vanish if he blinked. Then she looked up and saw him. Her face went pale. She stood slowly, her hands trembling, and for a long moment they simply stared at each other across the garden. "How did you find me?" she whispered. "I never stopped looking." Sora's eyes filled with tears. "You shouldn't have come." "Why did you leave?" The question hung in the air, raw and desperate. Sora looked away, her jaw tight. "Because I was falling in love with you, and I couldn't let that happen." Minho felt his breath catch. "Why not?" "Because we're from different worlds," her voice broke. "Because you're a CEO and I'm nothing. Because I would only ever be a burden to you, a reminder of charity, something you took pity on. Because I couldn't stand the thought of waking up every day in your house, near you, feeling this way and knowing it could never be real." Minho crossed the garden in 3 long strides and took her hands in his. "You are not nothing," he said fiercely. "You are the strongest, kindest, most beautiful person I have ever known. And I have been in love with you since the moment I saw you protect my son. I don't care about different worlds. I don't care about anything except the fact that I cannot live without you." Sora shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand?" "Then make me understand." She pulled her hands free, wrapping her arms around herself. "What happens when you get tired of me? When the novelty wears off and you realize I don't fit into your life? When your friends and colleagues look at me and see a homeless woman you took pity on? What happens then?" Minho's voice was steady, certain. "That will never happen." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. Because what I feel for you has nothing to do with pity. It has nothing to do with who you were or where you came from. It has everything to do with who you are. The person who gives everything and asks for nothing. The person who makes my son laugh. The person who makes me want to be better." He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The person I want to spend the rest of my life with." Sora stared at him, her eyes wide and disbelieving. "You can't mean that." "I have never meant anything more." The silence stretched between them, fragile and trembling. Then Sora spoke, her voice barely audible. "I'm scared." "So am I. What if I hurt you? What if I'm not enough?" Minho reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "You are more than enough. You always have been." And then, because words were no longer enough, he kissed her. It was soft and tentative and filled with all the longing and fear and hope that had built between them over these long months. Sora froze for a heartbeat, and then she kissed him back, her hands clutching at his shirt as though he were the only solid thing in a world that was spinning too fast. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were crying. "Come home," Minho whispered. "Please, come home." Sora closed her eyes, and Minho saw the war raging inside her, between hope and fear, between the desire to believe and the terror of being hurt again. Finally, she opened her eyes and nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." They returned to Seoul together. Jiwoo's reaction when he saw Sora walk through the door was pure, unfiltered joy. He ran to her, throwing his arms around her waist, and Sora knelt down and held him tightly, whispering apologies and promises into his hair. Minho watched them, his heart so full it hurt, and knew that this was what home felt like. Over the following weeks, they slowly built a new kind of life together. It was not perfect. There were moments when Sora's old fears resurfaced, when she pulled away, afraid of being too happy, too hopeful. There were moments when Minho's work consumed him, and he forgot to show her how much she mattered. But they learned. They learned to talk, to be honest, to trust each other with their broken pieces. They learned that love was not about perfection, but about choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. And slowly, the walls around both their hearts began to crumble. 6 months later, Minho asked Sora to marry him. He did not make a grand gesture or plan an elaborate proposal. He simply asked her one quiet evening as they sat together watching Jiwoo play in the garden, the setting sun painting the world in shades of gold. "Will you marry me?" he said, and his voice was calm but his hands were shaking. Sora looked at him, her eyes shining. "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything." She smiled then, a smile that lit up her entire face, and nodded. "Yes." They married in a small ceremony with only close friends and family present. Sora wore a simple white dress, and Minho could not take his eyes off her. When they exchanged vows, his voice broke, and Sora reached up to wipe away his tears. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you too." And in that moment, Minho understood that everything he had searched for, purpose, meaning, connection, had been waiting for him in the quiet strength of a woman who had saved his son, and without knowing it, saved him too. Years passed. Jiwoo grew into a kind, thoughtful boy who volunteered at soup kitchens and spoke passionately about helping those in need. Sora continued her work with the homeless community, using Minho's resources to create programs and shelters throughout the city. And Minho learned to see the world through her eyes, to notice the people he had once overlooked, to use his wealth and power for something more than profit. They were not perfect. They still argued, still struggled, still faced moments of doubt and fear. But they faced them together. One evening, as they sat on the terrace watching the city lights spread out below them, Sora leaned her head against Minho's shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Choosing me?" Minho turned to look at her, surprised. "Never. Why would you ask that?" "Because your life would be easier without me. Simpler." Minho took her hand and kissed it gently. "My life would be empty without you. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." Sora smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real. Sometimes I wake up afraid that it's all a dream and I'll find myself back on the streets." Minho pulled her closer. "It's real. And I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that." They sat in silence for a while, holding each other as the night deepened around them. And Minho thought about the day he had first seen her, a thin, ragged figure throwing herself into danger to save his son. He thought about the long search, the fear of losing her, the slow, painful process of learning to love and be loved. He thought about how much his life had changed because of her. And he was grateful, not just for the love they shared, but for the person she had helped him become, the person who cared, who noticed, who understood that true wealth had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the connections we forge and the kindness we show. "Thank you," he whispered. Sora looked up at him, confused. "For what?" "For saving me." She smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. "You saved me too." And beneath the stars, in the quiet peace of that moment, they held each other and knew that they had found something rare and precious. They had found home, not in a place, but in each other. And that was enough.